call came before sunrise, when the house still smelled like last night's rain and grief hadn't fully settled yet. His voice was calm, almost gentle, but the warning cut sharp. Don't tell the kids. Come now. By the time I reached his office, I already felt something waiting for me, something that would not let me leave unchanged. After my wife's sudden passing, life narrowed into quiet routines, packing lunches I no longer had help making, answering questions I didn't know how to soothe. She had worked for a powerful man, wealthy, private, distant, someone I'd only seen from afar. When he summoned me without explanation, the city felt unfamiliar, as if I were walking through someone else's life, unaware that the truth I was about to face had been hiding in plain sight for years. The phone rang before the sun had fully decided to rise. That in-between hour when the sky is still gray and the world feels like it's holding its breath. The kettle sat cold on the stove. The house was quiet in the way only grief can make it quiet, too still, too aware of itself. I remember standing there, barefoot on the kitchen tiles, watching my breath fog the glass of the window. The streetlight outside was still on, humming softly, like it didn't know yet that morning was coming. When the phone rang, the sound felt louder than it should have. It cut through the silence, sharp and insistent, as if it knew I was already awake. As if it knew sleep hadn't come easily since she left. I looked at the screen for a long second before answering an unfamiliar number. My first thought wasn't fear. It was exhaustion. Hello, there was a pause on the other end, not static, not hesitation. Just a measured breath, like the man had been waiting for me to speak. My name is Richard Hale, he said. His voice was calm, smooth, the kind of voice that had practiced being calm for a living. I'm very sorry for your loss. I leaned to the counterpasser. I leaned against the counter. The word loss still felt strange when spoken out loud, like it didn't quite belong to me yet. People kept saying it, and every time they did, it landed somewhere different in my chest. He continued speaking, his tone steady, respectful. He said he was my wife's employer, her boss. I knew the name, vaguely. She had mentioned him once or twice over the years, always briefly, never with detail. Just enough for me to understand he was important, wealthy, private. I won't take much of your time, he said. But I need you to come see me this morning. I glanced at the clock on the wall. The second hand moved too slowly, dragging itself around the circle. 5:36 a.m. now? Now? I asked. Yes, he replied, as soon as you can. Something about the way he said it made my stomach tighten. Not urgency, not panic, something colder, controlled. Then he added, almost gently, and I need you to come alone. I frowned, rubbing my thumb along the edge of the counter. Alone? For now, he said. And I'd ask that you don't tell your children about this meeting. The words settled between us, heavy and deliberate. I could hear my own breathing, shallow and uneven. Somewhere down the hall, a floorboard creaked as the house shifted, like it was listening too. Why? I asked. There was another pause, this one longer, more careful. It's better this way, he said. I'll explain everything when you arrive. I wanted to argue, wanted to demand answers. But grief does something to your instincts. It dulls them, makes you unsure of your footing. I found myself nodding even though he couldn't see me. All right, I said quietly. I'll have someone expecting you, he replied, and again, I'm very sorry. The line went dead. I stayed there, phone still pressed to my ear, listening to nothing, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint buzz of the streetlight outside, my own heartbeat, louder now. I lowered the phone slowly and set it on the table. It looked small there, innocent, like it hadn't just changed the shape of my morning. The silence that followed was heavier than the call itself. It filled the kitchen, crawled up the walls, pressed against my chest. I stared at the clock again. 5:39, tick, tick, tick. Each second felt exaggerated, like time had decided to make itself known. I wondered if this was how it felt right after the earth stopped spinning, quiet, unsure what to do next. I poured myself a glass of water, my hand shaking slightly. The glass clinked against the faucet, the sound too sharp in the stillness. I took a sip and let it sit in my mouth before swallowing, grounding myself in the cold. My wife's coat was still hanging on the back of the chair. I hadn't moved it. It smelled faintly like her perfume, the one she wore sparingly. I brushed my fingers against the sleeve as I passed, a habit I hadn't yet learned to break. Yeah, she never talked much about her job. I used to think that meant it was boring. Paperwork, meetings, numbers, something distant from our home life. Now, standing alone in that kitchen, I wondered what else she hadn't said. What parts of herself she'd kept neatly folded away. Down the hall, I heard a soft cough, their 29 cough. One of the kids turning in their sleep. The sound pulled me back into my body, into my role, father. Protector, the man who was supposed to know what was happening. Don't tell the children. Okay. The words echoed again, unsettling. Why would her boss care what my children knew? Why would it matter now? I walked to the doorway of their room and stood there quietly. The early light crept in through the curtains, painting their faces in pale blue and gray. One of them had kicked off the blanket. I tucked it back around their shoulders, careful not to wake them. For a moment I considered staying, ignoring the call, pretending it hadn't happened. The thought felt tempting, warm, safe. But it didn't last. Whatever this was, it wasn't going to disappear on its own. Back in the kitchen, I grabbed my keys and wallet. I paused at the sink, catching my reflection in the dark window. I looked older than I remembered, tired. Hollowed out around the eyes. I'll be back soon, I whispered to the empty room. I wasn't sure who I was saying it for. As I stepped outside, the air was cool and damp. The sky was still undecided, caught between night and morning. Somewhere, a bird called out, tentative and unsure. I locked the door behind me, the click sounding final, in a way that made my chest ache. I stood there for a second longer than necessary, keys clenched in my hand, feeling the weight of everything unsaid. The street was quiet as I walked to the car. No traffic yet, no movement. Just me and the echo of that voice on the phone. Come now, he had said. As I pulled away from the curb, I glanced back at the house in the rearview mirror. It looked the same as always, ordinary, peaceful, but I knew better now. Somewhere between that gray sky and the road ahead, something was already shifting, and I had the uneasy feeling that by the time I returned, nothing would feel quite the same again. Morning arrived without ceremony, no color, no warmth. Just a thin light slipping through the blinds like it wasn't sure it was welcome. The house felt different in daylight. At night, grief had room to hide in the dark corners. In the morning, it stood out in the open, on the counters, in the hallways, in the places where her presence used to soften everything. I stood in the kitchen for a long moment, listening to the quiet, not the peaceful kind. The kind that feels unfinished. Her mug was still by the sink. The one with the chipped rim she refused to throw away. I picked it up, felt the familiar weight of it in my hand, and for a second my body reacted before my mind did. I almost rinsed it, almost set it back where it belonged. Instead, I just held it there, letting the cold ceramic seep into my palm. The clock on the wall said it was nearly 6. Time kept moving, indifferent to the fact that something essential had stopped. I walked slowly through the house, each step careful, as if the floor might protest. The hallway creaked beneath me the same way it always had, like it remembered our routines better than I did. Her scarf was still draped over the back of the chair by the door. I hadn't noticed it last night. Or maybe I had, and my mind refused to hold on to it. I brushed my fingers across the fabric, soft. Still faintly carrying her scent, the kids' door was closed. I paused there, listened. Their breathing was steady, even. They slept the way only children can, unaware of how fragile everything really is. I rested my hand against the doorframe and let myself stay there a little longer than necessary. And the house used to wake up with her, the clink of a spoon and a mug, the soft hum of her voice as she moved from room to room. Now morning had no sound at all. Kickling. When they finally stirred, it happened quietly. No rush, no panic, just the slow unfolding of another day that didn't know it had changed. One of them padded into the kitchen, rubbing their eyes, hair sticking up in places she used to smooth down with a smile. "Where's Mom?" came the question, soft and automatic. The words landed hard, even though I knew they were coming. "Where Ken, she's resting," I said. My voice sounded distant to my own ears, like it belonged to someone else. They nodded, accepting it the way kids do, trusting the shape of my words more than their meaning. Trust is such a fragile thing. I felt it settle on my shoulders like a weight I didn't know how to carry yet. I poured cereal into bowls, listening to it rattle against the glass. Milk sloshed a little over the edge. She used to tease me for that, said I always poured like I was distracted. I wiped the counter clean with the sleeve of my sweater, my movements slow and deliberate. I have to step out for a bit, I said, keeping my tone like casual. Just an errand. How long? One of them asked. Spoon paused halfway to their mouth. Not long, I replied. I hoped that was true. And they accepted that too. No suspicion, no questions. I hated myself a little for how easy it was. And as they ate, I moved around them, checking things that didn't need checking, the thermostat, the lights, the door lock. Anything to keep my hands busy. Anything to avoid standing still long enough for the truth to catch up. I helped them find their shoes, tied laces she usually tied. My fingers fumbled, clumsy in ways they hadn't been before. One of them laughed softly, and the sound cut through me. Not because it hurt, but because it reminded me of what was still here, what I couldn't afford to break. When it was time, I knelt down in front of them, forcing myself to meet their eyes. They looked up at me, open and unguarded. I'll be back soon, I said again. They nodded. One of them reached out and hugged me around the neck, quick and warm. I closed my eyes for a second, breathing them in. The smell of soap, of childhood, of something still safe. Be good, I whispered, more to myself than to them. I stood and turned away before they could see the way my face tightened. The door clicked shut behind me with a sound that felt too final. I locked it slowly, deliberately, as if the act itself was something I needed to remember how to do. The key turned with a soft resistance, then gave way. Outside, the air was cooler than I expected. Morning had advanced just enough to bring color back into the street. A neighbor's car pulled away. Someone's radio played faintly from down the block. Life, apparently, was still happening. And I stood there on the porch for a moment, staring at the door, at the thin strip of paint peeling near the handle where she always said we should touch it up. I wondered if she ever noticed how many things she left unfinished. The guilt crept in quietly. Not sharp, not overwhelming, just steady, persistent, the kind that settles in your chest and stays there. And, yeah? What kind of truth begins with silence? The question echoed as I walked to the car. Each step away from the house felt heavier than the last. I slid into the driver's seat and sat there with my hands on the wheel, not starting the engine right away. Through the windshield, the house looked smaller, more distant, like it was already slipping into memory. I thought about the phone call again, about his voice, the calm certainty with which he'd told me not to tell them, as if he knew something I didn't, as if he'd already decided what was best for my family. I told myself it was temporary, just for now, just until I understood what was happening, but the words didn't fully convince me. I started the car. The engine hummed to life, grounding me in the present. As I pulled away from the curb, I caught sight of my reflection in the rearview mirror. There was a hesitation in my eyes, a fracture I hadn't seen before. At the end of the street, I slowed and glanced back one last time. The curtains in the kids' room were still drawn. They were inside, eating cereal, believing in my promise. Believing in me, I turned the corner and the house disappeared from view. The road ahead stretched out, quiet and unfamiliar, even though I'd driven it 1,000 times. Somewhere between where I'd been and where I was going, a line had been crossed. And I knew, with a certainty that made my chest tighten, that whatever waited for me at the other end of that drive would change the way I walked back through that door. Some truths don't arrive all at once. Some begin with silence. The city didn't look up when I drove into it. It never does. And grass buildings caught the early light and threw it back without warmth, pale reflections sliding across my windshield. Traffic moved the way it always had, steady, indifferent, practiced, red lights, green lights, people already late for something. I followed the flow, hands resting at 10 and 2, breathing slow like I was afraid to disturb the morning. Inside the car, everything felt muted. The radio stayed off, the heater hummed low. Even my thoughts seemed padded, like they were wrapped in cotton and set gently beside me. Outside, the world went on. Inside, time felt stretched thin. I passed the bakery she liked, the one she always said smelled better from the sidewalk than it tasted inside. The lights were on now. Someone was unlocking the door. I wondered if they remembered her face. If she'd already faded there the way people do when they stop showing up. The road dipped slightly as I crossed the bridge into downtown. Water below reflected the gray sky, broken by ripples and passing birds. I kept my eyes forward, but my mind kept drifting back to the phone call, To the warning, to the way his voice hadn't shaken once. I tried to think of the questions I would ask when I got there. Why now? Why the secrecy? Why her? They lined up neatly in my head, then fell apart just as quickly. None of them felt big enough. None of them felt like they would touch whatever truth was waiting for me. She rarely talked about her work. That wasn't new. When I asked, she'd smile, tired but affectionate, and say it was boring. That it paid well. That it came with expectations, discretion, mostly. I used to think that meant NDAs and quiet meetings, the kind of thing people in tall buildings deal with. And now driving through the shadow of those same buildings, I wondered what else that word had covered. Discretion. The traffic slowed near a cluster of offices. Brake lights glowed red, one after another, like a string of low-burning embers. I stopped and rested my forehead briefly against the steering wheel, eyes closed, not long enough to be dangerous. Just long enough to feel the weight of my body. What did she carry alone? The question came uninvited and stayed. I pictured her coming home late, slipping off her shoes by the door, rubbing her temples like she was trying to press something away. I'd noticed it, of course, but I'd also let it pass. We all have tired days. We all choose which parts of ourselves to bring home. The light turned green. I moved again. Downtown rose up around me, taller now, closer. The streets narrowed. Shadows stretched between buildings, long and cool. I felt smaller here, like I was driving into someone else's life, one she'd never fully let me see. She had known how to keep things separate. I realized that now. How to be present at dinner while her mind stayed somewhere else. How to answer my questions without really answering them. It hadn't felt like distance at the time. It had felt like professionalism, privacy. Love has a way of trusting what it wants to trust. King. I turned onto the avenue he'd mentioned. The name sounded expensive. The kind of street you don't accidentally end up on. I slowed, scanning the numbers on the buildings, my pulse ticking up with each block. Was this meeting something she always knew would come? The thought sat heavy in my chest. I imagined her knowing. Imagined her waking up one morning with the quiet understanding that one day I would get a call like this. That one day I would be the one driving downtown before sunrise, rehearsing questions I didn't know how to ask. And a delivery truck honked behind me. I realized I'd slowed too much. I waved an apology. I wasn't sure the driver saw and pulled forward, finding the building at last. It rose higher than the rest, clean lines, dark glass, a lobby that looked more like a museum than a workplace. I parked across the street and sat there for a moment, engine idling. The reflection of my car trembled faintly in the glass across from me. I checked the time, 6:48. I wasn't late, I wasn't early, I was exactly where he'd wanted me to be. I shut off the engine. The sudden quiet rang in my ears. I opened the door and stepped out, the air cooler here, funneled between buildings. The smell of coffee drifted from somewhere unseen. A security guard stood near the entrance, hands folded, eyes scanning without really seeing. As I crossed the street, my shoes clicked against the pavement, the sound sharper than I expected. Each step felt deliberate, counted. I became aware of my posture, the set of my shoulders. I wondered if I looked like someone who belonged here. The lobby swallowed me whole. Marble floors, soft lighting. The echo of footsteps that weren't mine. A woman at the front desk looked up, professional smile already in place. "Yoken, I'm here to see Mr. Hale," I said. She glanced at a screen, nodded once, and gestured toward the elevators. "He's expecting you," of course he was, and then she left, no smile, no parting glance. Just the soft click of her heels fading away, the sound dissolving into silence. I stood there alone facing the doors. They were darker than the others, heavier, polished wood, unmarred. The kind of doors that don't get slammed, the kind that close themselves quietly behind you. Everriking Safbering. I placed my hand on the handle and hesitated. The wood was cool, smooth beneath my palm. For a moment, I thought of my wife's hand on the doorknob at home. The small scratch near the base she'd pointed out once, saying we should fix it someday. I pushed the door open. The office smelled like polished wood and something faintly citrus, clean but not sharp. Leather chairs sat arranged with intention, not comfort. A large desk faced the windows, its surface almost empty. No clutter. No personal photos, just a single folder placed carefully near the center. Light poured in from the wall of windows behind it. So much light it made the city outside look distant, unreal. Buildings shrank from this height, their edges softened by glass and glare. Cars below moved like slow insects, their sounds lost entirely. I took a few steps inside and stopped. The door closed behind me on its own, quiet and controlled. The room felt insulated, protected. Like the outside world couldn't reach this high. I stood there, unsure where to sit. My hands found each other again, fingers interlacing tightly. I realized then how aware I was of my own presence. My breathing, the slight ache in my shoulders, the weight of everything I hadn't said yet. This was not a place built for questions, it was built for answers on someone else's terms. I moved toward the window instead of the chairs, drawn by the view. From here, the city looked small enough to manage, problems reduced to patterns, people to dots. I wondered how often my wife had stood here. If she had looked out at this same view and felt the same distance I did now. And did she feel powerful up here or alone? The sound of the door opening pulled me back, soft, measured. He entered without hurry, tall, composed. His suit fit him the way confidence fits a man who's worn it for years. His hair was silver at the temples, neat. His face carried a seriousness that didn't need to announce itself. "Thank you for coming," he said. His voice was the same as it had been on the phone. Calm, controlled. Polite enough to feel practiced, he extended his hand. I took it, his grip firm but brief. "I know this isn't easy," he added. He didn't wait for my response. Instead, he gestured toward one of the chairs. Now, one of the chairs. I sat when he did, the leather cool beneath me, too smooth to relax into. The chair across from me remained empty. He folded his hands on the desk and studied me. Not rudely, thoroughly. Like he was reading something written very small. "You've been through a great deal," he said. "And I won't pretend to understand your grief." The words landed softly, but they didn't linger. They felt like formalities, placed carefully so we could move past them. I nodded once. My throat felt tight. "I asked you here," he continued, "because there are things you need to know. And things that must be handled with care." Care, that word again. I glanced at the folder on the desk. Thin, unassuming, whatever was inside it didn't look heavy enough to explain this building, this height, this secrecy. "Yeah, I was told not to tell my children," I said quietly. His eyes flickered, just briefly. Acknowledgement, not surprise. "That was not a request I made lightly," he replied. "Your children's lives are already in transition. There is no need to add confusion before clarity. Before clarity." I leaned back slightly, the chair barely yielding. "And what is it you think I'm confused about?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stood and walked toward the windows, hands clasped behind his back. From this angle, his reflection overlapped with the city outside, his outline breaking into glass and sky. "Can you stand up, Garang? Your wife," he said, "was a remarkable woman." I felt something tighten at the sound of her described that way. Not as my wife, not as their mother, as something else, something professional, something defined by him. She carried responsibilities that extended beyond her job description, he continued, responsibilities that required discretion, loyalty, and, at times, silence. I watched his reflection instead of his face. It was easier that way. It was. She understood the cost of that, he said, and she accepted it. I thought of the nights she came home late, the mornings she left before dawn, the questions smiled through. The way she would sometimes stand at the window at home, staring out without really seeing anything. "How long?" I asked. He turned back toward me slowly, "Longer than you realize." I walked toward the elevators, my reflection joining me in the polished doors. I barely recognized the man staring back. His face looked composed, but his eyes told a different story. They carried a question I couldn't answer yet. The elevator ride was quiet, no music, just the soft whir of cables and the slow climb upward. The numbers lit up one by one. I watched them, feeling each floor pass like a threshold. With every rise, my thoughts grew heavier. I thought about the kids at home, about the lie I'd told them so easily, about how lies, once started, have a way of multiplying. And the elevator stopped, the doors slid open, a hallway stretched out before me, carpeted, hushed. Framed artwork lined the walls, abstract shapes, muted colors, the kind of art that suggests meaning without committing to it. And I took a step forward, then another. Somewhere ahead, a door waited, a conversation, answers, maybe, or more questions dressed up as explanations. As I walked, a strange calm settled over me, not peace, something steadier. Like my body had decided it would carry me through this whether I was ready or not. I thought of her again, of the way she used to pause before answering certain questions, The way her eyes would flicker, just briefly, before she smiled and changed the subject. And maybe she'd been protecting me, maybe she'd been protecting them, or maybe she'd been protecting something else entirely. Yokak and Estetask and Cow. I stopped at the end of the hall. A door stood there, closed unmarked except for a small plaque. My name wasn't on it, hers wasn't either. I raised my hand, hesitated, then knocked softly. The sound echoed more than it should have. As I waited for the door to open, I felt it clearly then, the sense that this building, this moment had been set in motion long before that phone ever rang. And whatever waited on the other side of that door had been waiting for me, too. The handle turned. And I understood just before it opened that the city's indifference wasn't cruelty at all. It was preparation. Kankanak had rum the seri konder to kakafrikak. The doors closed behind me with a sound that felt deliberate, not loud, not harsh, just final enough to notice. The lobby stretched wider than it needed to, all stone and glass and echoes that didn't belong to anyone. My footsteps moved ahead of me, arriving before I did. Somewhere above, something hummed air systems, maybe, or the building breathing in its own quiet way. I stopped just long enough to take it in. The height, the chill. The sense that I had stepped into a place built to make people feel smaller. An assistant appeared from behind the desk as if she had been standing there the whole time, waiting for the exact moment I'd look up. She wore black, simple, impeccable. Her hair was pulled back so tightly it seemed like an act of discipline, mister. Hale is ready for you, she said. Her voice carried no curiosity, no sympathy, just information. She turned and walked toward the elevators, already confident I would follow. I did. Her heels clicked against the marble, sharp and rhythmic, like punctuation marks at the end of sentences I hadn't finished yet. Each click landed cleanly, controlled. The sound echoed up the walls and came back thinner, less certain. The elevator ride was shorter this time, but it felt longer. Higher the numbers climbed without hesitation. I stood with my hands folded in front of me, staring at the metal doors. My reflection wavered there, distorted just enough to feel unfamiliar. The assistant didn't look at me. Didn't ask how I was holding up, didn't offer condolences. In a strange way, I was grateful for that. When the doors opened, the air changed, warmer, still thick with something I couldn't name yet. The carpet swallowed the sound of our steps, muting everything except my breathing. The hallway was narrower than the lobby, lined with framed photos and abstract art that suggested importance without explaining it. We passed doors that remained closed. Behind them, I imagined quiet conversations, decisions being made in low voices, lives shifting without ceremony. This floor felt removed from the rest of the world, like it hovered above it. She stopped at the end of the hall and gestured toward a set of double doors. He'll be with you shortly, she said. The words settled between us, heavy but quiet. I realized then that this meeting wasn't about explanations. Not yet. It was about preparing me, about easing me into a reality I hadn't known existed. I looked around the office again. The empty chairs, the carefully chosen art, the silence that felt enforced. This wasn't just a place of work. Freen, Dries. It was a place where rules bent, where truths were portioned carefully. Where not everything was meant to leave the room. As I sat there waiting for him to continue, a strange certainty took hold. I had crossed a line simply by walking in. Whatever he was about to tell me would not fit back into the life I had left behind that morning. And as the city glowed faintly behind him, distant and small, I understood something else too. This office didn't sit above the street by accident, it sat above consequences. He reached for the folder, and I held my breath. He didn't knock when he came back in. The door opened softly, like it had been waiting for him all along. For a moment, the room felt smaller. Not because of his presence, but because of the way he carried it. He closed the door behind him with care, then turned toward me. His expression composed in that practiced way, solemn but not heavy, as if he had learned long ago how to hold grief at arm's length. "I'm truly sorry," he said again. Not louder than before, not softer either. The same measured tone, like repetition, gave the words weight instead of wearing them thin. I nodded, unsure what version of myself was supposed to respond now. The husband, the father, the man who had just learned his wife had been living in deeper waters than he'd ever known. And he didn't sit right away. Instead, he walked to the sideboard near the window, poured himself a glass of water, and offered me one with a small gesture. I declined. My throat felt too tight for it. He sat across from me then, folding his hands again on the desk. The folder remained closed between us, untouched. It felt intentional, like a boundary your wife was. He paused, searching for a word he could stand behind. Uncommon. The word hung there, careful and respectful, not praise, not exaggeration. Yeah, she had a way of listening that made people tell the truth, he continued, even when they didn't plan to. Ken, I shifted slightly in the chair. That sounded like her. The way she'd sit quietly at dinner parties, letting conversations come to her instead of chasing them. The way people always seemed to confide in her, then look surprised afterward, like they hadn't meant to say that much. She was steady, he said, reliable. She understood the value of restraint. I swallowed. At home, restraint had looked like exhaustion, like patience stretched thin, like silence after long days. She never spoke about her work, I said quietly. A corner of his mouth lifted. Not a smile. Something closer to acknowledgement. That was by design, he replied, and by choice. The words landed heavier than he intended, I think, or maybe exactly as he intended. I watched his eyes as he spoke, sharp, observant, always measuring. She believed in keeping her world separate, he went on. For good reason, I leaned forward slightly. Did she believe that, I asked, or did you? This time the pause was longer. He didn't look away. That's Master Mape after. Didn't bristle. He simply considered me, as if I'd asked a fair question. She understood the risks, he said at last, and she accepted them, and okay. The phrase returned like a bruise you press without meaning to. He glanced toward the folder, then away again. Not yet. You mentioned your children, he said. How old are they? The shift caught me off guard. It felt abrupt, but not careless. 8, I said, and 11. Okay, he nodded slowly, as if placing that information somewhere precise. They're close? He asked. Yes. And they were close to her? I didn't answer right away. The question wasn't painful because it surprised me. It was painful because it didn't. She was their center, I said finally. Even when she wasn't home, everything still seemed to orbit her. He listened. Truly listened. His eyes didn't wander. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he exhaled quietly, as if that breath carried something personal away with it. She spoke of them, he said. Often that stopped me. I looked up at him. She did? Yes, he said. Yes, he said. Not in detail. She was careful, but it was clear they mattered deeply to her. The word mattered felt too small, but I didn't correct him. She worried about them, he continued. About what they saw, what they didn't. A faint chill moved through me. Kamesh and Sekta non to the mice for Dushirers and Tefchu were for Shuram, I asked. Is that why you told me not to tell them? I asked. His eyes held mine. There it was again, that guarded concern, genuine but controlled for now, he said. Yes. Ang? I leaned back, the leather chair cool and unyielding. You keep saying that, he nodded once, because timing matters. Or because you're afraid of what happens if they know, I said. He didn't deny it. Children don't need to carry adult truths, he said carefully. Not until those truths can no longer harm them. And who decides when that is? I asked. This time he looked down just briefly. When he looked back up, something had shifted. Not regret, something closer to responsibility. Your wife trusted my judgment. Your wife trusted my underjudgment the same. Your wife trusted my judgment, he said. And now I'm asking you to do the same. The weight of that request settled slowly. Trust from a man who had known parts of my wife I had not, who had stood beside her in rooms I had never entered. What exactly did she do for you? I asked. His gaze flicked to the window, then back to me. She solved problems, he said quietly, that was all. I waited. He didn't elaborate, and when she couldn't, I pressed. He inhaled through his nose, slow and controlled. Cal, then she made sure the consequences were contained, he replied, contained. The city outside the window felt very far away suddenly. He folded his hands tighter on the desk. She was loyal, he added, not to me, to the work, to the idea that some things are worth protecting even at personal cost. I thought of her again, standing at our kitchen sink late at night, staring out the window like she was bracing herself for something. I'd asked her once what she was thinking about. Just work, she'd said. Ali-chan smiled. What happened? I asked now. What changed? His jaw tightened slightly, the smallest sign I'd seen yet. Furthasan shikspashik. Some truths don't reveal themselves all at once, he said. Sometimes they surface only after the person holding them is gone. The room felt quieter after that. Even the hum of the building seemed to fade. I looked at the folder again. It hadn't moved. But it felt closer. You knew her differently, I said. Not an accusation, a realization. Yes, he said. I did. And now I continued, you know something about me. He considered that, then nodded. Yeah, I know, he said, that you loved her, that you're trying to protect your children, and that you didn't ask for this. He stood then, slowly, as if the chair resisted letting him go. She trusted you, he said, more than you realize. The words struck deeper than anything else he'd said. He reached for the folder at last, but didn't open it. Just rested his hand on top, grounding it. And what I'm about to show you, he said, will change the way you understand her. And possibly the way you understand yourself. The light shifted through the window, clouds passing overhead, dimming the city below. I nodded once, not because I was ready, but because I was already here. And as he drew the folder closer, I realized something with quiet certainty. Whatever he knew about my wife, he knew it because she had chosen to let him. And I was about to learn why. The hallway felt longer than it had before. Not in distance, but in intention. The light overhead dimmed as we walked, softer now, more controlled. Carpet absorbed our footsteps completely, leaving only the faint sound of our breathing to remind me I was still moving. Mr. Hale walked a step ahead of me, hands folded behind his back, his pace unhurried. One Fergan Hanofer, as if time bent to him in this place. As if nothing on the other side of the walls had any urgency at all, the air felt cooler here. Or maybe I was just more aware of my skin? I noticed the way my jacket brushed against my arms, the subtle resistance of fabric, the way my shoulders tightened without my permission. Every part of me seemed alert now, listening for something it couldn't name. We passed another door, then another, each one closed, each one silent. Riewadavor, each one closed, each one silent. I wondered how many truths lived behind doors like these. How many lives had been rerouted with a simple turn of a handle. Mr. Hale stopped without warning. We stood before a door unlike the others, smaller, plainer, no plaque, no frosted glass. Just a solid surface painted a neutral gray, the kind of color meant to disappear into the background. Eckening, he raised his hand toward the handle and then paused. It was a small hesitation, almost imperceptible. But it was there. His fingers rested on the metal, not gripping it yet. The moment stretched. In that quiet space, my heart began to race, fast and shallow, like it was trying to escape something my mind hadn't caught up to yet. I swallowed. What's in there? I asked. He didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed on the door, not on me. When he spoke, his voice was lower than before. Yang, this, he said carefully, is where your wife drew the line. The words landed softly, but they left an impression. I stepped closer without realizing it, my body leaning toward the door as if pulled. Cow, she insisted, he continued, that if anything ever happened to her, this would be shown to you and only you. My pulse thudded in my ears. Why? I asked. He finally looked at me then, really looked. Whatever he saw there seemed to settle something inside him. Because she believed, he said, that you would understand what others might not. I didn't feel understanding. I felt exposed, like I was standing too close to a mirror I hadn't asked to face. He turned the handle. The door opened quietly without resistance, no creak, no announcement, just a gentle release like it had been waiting. The room beyond felt suspended in time. The light was different. Here, rather warschen hatter softer batter. Different here, softer, warmer. It came from lamps instead of windows, casting long, gentle shadows along the walls. The air smelled faintly of old paper and something floral, subtle and familiar. Lavender, maybe. Or soap. I took a step inside and stopped. The room was modest, smaller than the office we'd left. A couch sat against one wall, worn but clean. A bookshelf lined another, filled with binders and neatly stacked folders. A small table held a framed photograph turned face down, as if it had been placed there deliberately, waiting. And then I saw the chair. It was positioned near the far wall, angled slightly toward the center of the room. Someone had been sitting there recently. The cushion still held its shape. My breath caught. Mr. Hale remained by the door, not entering. He watched me carefully, like a doctor watching a patient take their first steps after waking. Yeah, she spent a great deal of time in this room, he said quietly. I moved further in, my steps slow, reverent. My eyes traced the edges of the space, taking in every detail. A folded blanket on the arm of the couch. A mug on the table, empty now, but stained faintly at the bottom, the same kind she used at home. She wanted a place, he went on, where she could think without being overheard, where she could be herself. Like my chest tightened, I reached out and touched the back of the chair. The fabric was warm, recently used. I turned toward him. Who else comes in here? No one, he said, not unless she asked. I nodded, though I wasn't sure what I was agreeing to. My gaze drifted to the bookshelf. One binder stood out from the rest, thinner, labeled only with a date written in her handwriting. I recognized it instantly. My fingers hovered over it before I realized I'd reached for it. I pulled it free, the motion careful, almost tender. The cover was worn at the edges, the way things get when they're handled often but gently. Inside were notes, pages and pages of them, written in her neat, deliberate script, observations, questions, fragments of thoughts she'd never brought home. I flipped through slowly. Some pages were filled edge to edge. Others held only a single line. One sentence, underlined twice, make sure they're safe. Okay? I closed the binder, my hands trembling slightly now. She was always thinking ahead, Mr. Hale said. Planning for contingencies. Can't for what? I asked, my voice barely steady. He didn't answer directly. You hand for a cabin. She knew. He said that some truths, once known, can't be taken back. And she wanted to control how and when they were revealed. I looked around the room again. The lamps. The couch, the quiet. This doesn't feel like an office, I said. No, he agreed. It was never meant to. I walked toward the small table and picked up the framed photograph. For a moment, I hesitated. Then I turned it over. It was her, not recent, younger, sitting in a park I didn't recognize, sunlight catching in her hair. She was laughing, not smiling, not posing, but laughing freely. Something about the image felt private, like I was intruding on a moment she hadn't planned to share. I felt a strange ache in my chest, not grief exactly, something quieter, something closer to longing. Now, she kept that here, Mr. Hale said softly. She said it reminded her who she was before everything became. Complicated. I set the frame back down, my fingers lingering on the glass. What is this place? I asked. Okay, he stepped inside at last, closing the door behind him gently. This, he said, is where the story changes. The words settled into the room, heavy but unforced. I felt the shift immediately, the sense that we had crossed from explanation into revelation. He gestured toward another door at the back of the room. I hadn't noticed it before, smaller. Almost hidden in the shadow. There's someone in there, he said. My heart skipped. Someone? I echoed, yes. I stared at the door, my thoughts scrambling, my breath shallow. Who? I asked. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he watched me the way he had been all morning, carefully, thoughtfully, as if weighing what I could carry. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than it had ever been. Someone your wife believed you needed to meet. The room felt suddenly too still. Even the hum of the lights seemed to fade. I took a step toward the second door, my body moving before my mind could object. My hand lifted, hovering just inches from the handle. Behind it, I could feel a presence. Not fear. Not threat. And something else, something waiting. I paused there, hand suspended, heart racing for reasons I can't yet name. And in that moment, standing in a room my wife had built for Dot. Truths too heavy to carry home, I understood something with startling clarity. And whatever waited on the other side of that door, she had prepared me for it. Even if I hadn't known it at the time, the door opened without a sound, but the moment carried weight anyway. The kind that presses against your chest before your mind understands why. The room beyond was smaller than the one I had just left, lit by a single window, half covered by thin blinds. Late afternoon, light slipped through in pale lines, dust floating slowly in its path. There was a chair near the window, a table beside it, a glass of water untouched. Everything arranged with care, like someone expected to be here, but not for long. And then I saw the person standing near the window. My breath left me all at once. For a moment, I forgot how to move, forgot how to speak, even forgot where I was. The world narrowed to that one figure, framed in light and shadow, standing still as if afraid to disturb the air. They turned slowly. And when they did, something inside me cracked, not loudly, not all at once, but deep and quiet. The way ice breaks beneath your feet before you realize you're standing on a lake. It was her face, not exactly, but close enough that my heart reacted before my mind could intervene. The same curve of the cheek, the same eyes set just a little wider. Adder pliers, the same familiar line at the corner of the mouth, the one that used to appear when she was holding back a thought. I felt dizzy, the room tilted slightly, then steadied. For a brief, foolish second, I thought I had lost my grip on reality. That grief had finally caught up to me and pulled me somewhere it shouldn't. I half expected the image to blur, to dissolve into memory. It didn't. The person stood there, breathing, blinking, real. Silence stretched between us, thick and trembling, the kind of silence that hums in your ears. I started, then stopped. My voice didn't feel like it belonged to me. They didn't speak either. Their hands were clasped loosely in front of them, knuckles pale, shoulders tense. They looked as startled as I felt, like we had collided in a place neither of us expected to find the other. I took a step back without meaning to. No, I whispered, not to them, to the idea forming in my mind. My thoughts scrambled for logic, for exponent shaped cruelly by time. Some elaborate mistake that would unravel if I waited long enough. But even as my mind searched, my chest knew better, because grief doesn't invent details like this. It doesn't imagine the way someone shifts their weight when they're nervous, or the exact tilt of a head when they're trying to read a room. Those things are learned, remembered. "I'm sorry," the person said softly. The voice was different, lower, careful. But the cadence, the pause before speaking, the way the words were chosen, felt achingly familiar. And that was when my knees threatened to give out. I reached for the back of the chair, steadying myself. The fabric was rough beneath my fingers, grounding me just enough to stay upright, mister. Hale remained in the doorway behind me. I could feel his presence without turning around. He didn't interrupt. Didn't rush the moment he had known this would happen. I was sure of it now. How? I began, then stopped again. The question was too large. Too many questions crowded behind it, all pushing forward at once. And the person took a small step toward me, then thought better of it and stopped. I didn't want to scare you, they said. She told me this might be hard. My throat tightened at the sound of her being mentioned so plainly, as if she were still just down the hall. As if she hadn't been lowered into the ground only days ago. "You knew her," I said. It wasn't a question and a suggestion. They nodded. Slowly, yes. The word echoed in the room. I studied their face again, searching now for the differences. They were there, if I looked closely, the nose slightly sharper. The brow not quite the same. The eyes, those eyes, held a caution I hadn't seen in my wife's. A kind of practiced restraint. Still, the resemblance was undeniable, unforgiving. Jenny from behind me. Please. I lowered myself into the chair, my movements stiff, mechanical. The person across from me sat as well, choosing the chair opposite, leaving space between us, respectful. Deliberate. The window behind them caught the light just right, outlining their profile in a soft glow. It felt staged, almost cinematic, and I resented the beauty of it. She didn't want you to meet me like this, they said quietly. She wanted time, more time. And I let out a breath that sounded more like a laugh, though there was no humor in it. She was always wanting more time, I said. A faint, sad smile touched their lips. It was gone almost immediately. Yes, they said, she was. Another silence settled in, heavier than the first. My hands rested in my lap, fingers curled inward as if holding onto something small and fragile. "What is this?" I asked finally, because I can't make sense of it. They looked down at their hands, then back up at me. "My name is Daniel," they said. They stopped, swallowed. "I'm her brother." They drifted, light as ash, before settling somewhere deep in my chest. "Brother." I stared at them, the room suddenly too quiet, too still. My ears rang faintly. She told you she was an only child?" Daniel continued. "I know. She told everyone that?" My mouth opened, then closed again. Memories surfaced unbidden, casual conversations, offhand remarks, the way she had always deflected questions about her childhood with humor or vagueness. She said her parents died young," I said slowly. "She said there was no one left." Daniel nodded. "That part was true. Mostly, the word mostly hung between us, unresolved. She left." He went on. When we were young, not just the house, not just the town she left me, something shifted then, not anger. Not yet, something colder, a realization forming its shape. She found me again years later, Daniel said. After she had built her life, after she had you and the kids. My chest tightened at the mention of them. She didn't tell me, I said. No, he agreed. I looked away, my gaze landing on the thin strip of light on the floor. Dust drifted through it lazily, unaware of the weight in the room. Why now? I asked. Why would she? Because she was afraid, Daniel said softly, and because she was running out of time. The words settled heavily. I felt them sink into me, slow and inevitable. He protect. And the children, she thought distance was safety. I closed my eyes briefly. Images of my wife flooded in, her quiet watchfulness, the way she listened more than she spoke, the careful choices she made without. How could she keep this from me? I asked. My voice wasn't raised. It didn't need to be. Daniel didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was gentle. She was afraid you'd look at her differently. That did it. I felt the shift then, not an explosion. Not a collapse, just a slow, painful turn inside my chest, like a door opening onto something I hadn't known was there. I looked back at Daniel, this man who carried her face like an echo, who stood as proof of a life she had kept hidden. He met my gaze, eyes steady but wet. I didn't come to take anything from you, he said. I wanted you to know she wasn't alone before you, and she wasn't alone at the end. The light in the room began to fade as a cloud passed outside. Shadows lengthened. The day moved on, indifferent. I sat there, surrounded by pieces of my wife I had never been allowed to see, feeling the weight of a truth that refused to settle neatly. Behind me, the door remained open. Ahead of me sat a man who should not have existed, and yet did. And somewhere in the quiet space between us, I realized this was only the beginning of what she had left behind. The room felt smaller now, as if the walls themselves had leaned in to listen. Sunlight cut through the blinds in sharp, dusty lines, brushing Daniel's face in gold. The air smelled faintly of old paper and the subtle tang of polish, like a space meant to be kept neat for secrets. I sat in the chair, hands folded too tightly in my lap, heart thudding in uneven rhythms, unsure whether I was ready to hear what she had left behind, or what she had kept from me. Daniel didn't speak at first. He opened a folder slowly, deliberately, as though touching it too quickly would fracture the story inside. When he did speak, it was quiet, careful, measured, every word weighed against something invisible. And she spent her life building trust, he began, not just with us, with everyone she worked with. I nodded slowly, though I wasn't sure what that meant yet. Every agreement, every decision, it wasn't just about work. It was about protection. I felt a small tremor in my hands. Protection for whom? For us? For herself? She didn't tell you, Daniel continued, eyes flicking toward me, because she believed some things are too heavy for those who love you. She carried them so we wouldn't have to. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Memories surfaced, sharp and disorienting. The nights she came home exhausted, brushing past me with just a smile. The hurried phone calls she took in the kitchen, ending with a quiet, "Everything's fine, nasty." The hurried phone calls she took in the kitchen, ending with a quiet, "Everything's fine." The weight of her silence, it had always been there, but I hadn't understood why. She worked in shadows, Daniel said, almost whispering. She kept promises that were never her own to break, decisions that could have cost her. Cost all of us if mishandled. I looked down at my hands again, fingers curling into my thighs. I thought of the times she had been patient, careful, deliberate, and now the reason for it came into focus like light through fog. She made sacrifices quietly, Daniel said. Not because she wanted credit, but because she believed the work itself mattered more than recognition, more than safety, more than comfort. I swallowed hard, my throat was tight. Anger rose first, subtle and simmering, anger at the secrecy, at the hidden burdens she'd carried alone. Then sorrow heavy and cold. And finally awe, the kind that steals your breath because you realize the magnitude of what one person can do in silence. What did she face? I asked, voice barely above the rustle of the blinds. Daniel hesitated, then leaned back in his chair, folding his hands loosely in his lap. Threats, manipulation. Choices no one should ever have to make. His eyes softened, but she never faltered. She did what she believed was right, even when it hurt her. I felt a shiver creep down my spine. I thought of all the evenings I had watched her sit quietly at the kitchen table, staring at a notebook I wasn't allowed to touch, smiling at me when I asked what was wrong, hiding the truth with a lie that made it easier for me to sleep. She was loyal, Daniel said, not blindly, not without thought, loyal to principles, to people who deserved it. To the idea that some lives are worth more than comfort. She protected those who couldn't protect themselves. And she protected you and the children by keeping this hidden. I wanted to speak, but the words caught in my throat. I tried again. Why didn't she tell me? Daniel didn't answer at first. He leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on his knees. She feared it would change how you saw her, he said. She worried you'd look at her differently. Or worse, that the children would. She wanted you to see her as your wife, not as a person burdened with what she carried. I closed my eyes. My mind was spinning, replaying small details in a new light, the phone calls, the late nights, the way she would pause at certain letters in the mail, the way she always left a door slightly open so we could see she was safe. She made choices based on love and fear, Daniel continued softly. She hid herself so the people she loved wouldn't carry her burdens, and yet, every choice cost her. Every sacrifice left a mark no one else could see. I opened my eyes and looked at him. The room felt full of silence, thick and trembling. I could feel the weight of what I hadn't known pressing down on my chest. Doesn't this make it worse? I whispered. Knowing all of it now, Daniel shook his head gently. It changes your understanding of her, yes. But it also shows who she was at her core. She loved deeply. She protected fiercely. She endured more than anyone should have to, and she did it so you could have. Untouched by her battles, I pressed my palms into my eyes for a moment, letting the tears come without shame. Grief and revelation braided together, knotted and tangled until I couldn't separate one from the other. I thought of the children. How would this reshape them if they knew? Could they even comprehend the weight she had carried, the quiet bravery she had shown every single day? She kept this life hidden, I said finally, voice breaking. Did she do it for us? Or for herself? Daniel didn't answer immediately. He let the question linger in the room, hovering like dust motes in sunlight, I think. She did it for both, he said softly. She wanted to protect you, and in protecting you, she protected herself. But above all, she wanted the life you shared to feel normal, even if it wasn't entirely possible. I sat back, chest heavy, and let his words settle over me like a blanket I hadn't realized I needed. I felt a complex ache of anger, sorrow, and awe swirl together. I looked down at the binder she had left behind, the careful notes and observations that had been her secret lifeline. She had lived another life alongside our life, one I had never been part of. And now, sitting in this quiet room with her brother, I finally understood just how much she had carried alone. Egazen fab tens 10 fans in 4 10 window nines. Daniel glanced toward the window again, shadows lengthening across the floor. She trusted me to help you understand, he said, voice gentle, because she knew the truth would change your world. But she also knew you could carry it. I swallowed, nodding. The room felt smaller and larger at once. Heavy with the past, full of revelations I wasn't ready to unpack completely. Outside, a car horn honked somewhere far below. The city carried on, indifferent, as it always did. But inside this small room, time felt suspended. Every breath I took seemed louder than it should, every movement deliberate. I touched the binder again, running my fingers along the edges. The life she had hidden was here, quiet but undeniable, and in that stillness I realized something crucial. Understanding her, truly understanding her, would not come all at once. It would come in pieces, in careful, patient discovery. In moments like this. Moments when the air is thick, the light slants perfectly across the floor, and you realize that someone you loved fully, completely, had layers you might never have known, until now. And I knew, even as the shadows deepened in the corners of the room, that each revelation was only the life she hid had been hers alone, but it was finally, painfully starting to belong to me too. The sunlight in the office had softened to a late afternoon gold, painting stripes across the polished wood floor. Daniel and Mr. Hale sat across from me, and I felt the room shrink with the weight of what was about to be said. Outside, the city hummed on, cars moving, voices drifting up from the streets, but inside, everything slowed to a quiet crawl, as if the walls themselves held their breath. Okay, I leaned forward slightly, hands resting on my knees, the binder from my wife still open beside me. Dust motes floated in a sunbeam, lazy and indifferent, but I couldn't look away. Mr. Hale cleared his throat softly. We've spoken about her life, what she carried, and what she left behind. Now, we need to speak about your children. The words landed heavily. I thought of their faces, how their small hands still clutched blankets at night, how their laughter could fill a room, how fragile their trust in the world was. The idea that this trust could be broken or reshaped was almost unbearable. They deserve to know, I said quietly. My voice shook, not with anger, but with the weight of a father realizing the gravity of his responsibility. Yes, Mr. Hale said, but timing matters, and so does framing your wife. She believed in shielding them from harm, from fear, from truths they couldn't yet carry. I stared at him, the lines of his face sharp in the fading light. He wasn't speaking as a boss now, not just as an employer. He carried a quiet regret that seemed almost tangible, the kind that clung to his clothes like a second skin. I don't know if I can do it, I whispered. How do you tell children that the person they knew, I gestured vaguely, held a life they never saw? How do you give them a truth that changes everything, Mr. Hale's eyes softened. He leaned back in his chair, hands folded in front of him. You start with what they can understand. Small pieces, comfort and context, always with love. I thought of their small faces, still trusting, still safe. Their questions, always simple but piercing. The way they looked at me for answers I sometimes didn't have. And suddenly, the binder felt heavier. It wasn't just paper and ink anymore. It was a map for a path I wasn't sure I could walk with them, Daniel spoke then, softly. She thought about this constantly, the day she might leave, the questions they would ask, the hurt they might feel. That was why she kept some things hidden, not to deceive, but to protect. And she trusted you to guide them through what she couldn't. I swallowed, my throat tight. The weight of that trust settled on my shoulders like a cold, familiar coat. I wanted to run from it. I wanted to stay in the room forever, just breathing, just holding the pieces of her memory safe for myself. But they were not mine alone anymore. Mr. Hale's voice broke the silence again. The challenge is this: tell them enough that the truth is real, but not so much that it overwhelms. Let them feel her presence without forcing them to carry the burdens she did. I closed my eyes and pictured their faces, my youngest always asking the small, endless questions. My eldest perceptive beyond their years, noticing the unspoken things. How would they react when the walls I'd built for them, walls of safety, of normalcy, were shaken by a truth I was only beginning to understand myself? Kanagan skaperde saperd sevenaderayan. Do you think they'll hate me? The words escaped before I could stop them. Daniel shook his head slowly. No, they'll mourn and they'll be confused, but children are resilient. The love she gave them, and the love you continue to give, that is stronger than fear, stronger than secrecy. I exhaled slowly, trying to let the tension leave my chest. The binder sat heavy on the table between us, its contents suddenly more urgent than ever. Every page, every note, every hidden corner of her life, the map of her courage, her sacrifices, was now a guide for how I might navigate this new responsibility. I don't want to fail them, I said softly. Not in this. You won't, Mr. Hale said, firm but gentle. You just have to be patient. Let the truth unfold naturally. Let it come with reassurance, with love, with space for questions. Don't rush it. The timing will teach them more than the facts ever could. I nodded, though my stomach twisted. Patience. Timing. Framing. The words sounded simple, but I knew the reality would be messy, unpredictable, emotional. And Daniel leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. She wanted you to know this too. That the truth isn't a single moment, it's a journey. And she trusted you to guide them through it, even if it's painful. The sunlight shifted again, falling across the binder's open pages, highlighting the neat lines of her handwriting. I traced one of them with a fingertip, the letters forming words I hadn't read until now. Words she had left as instructions, as guidance, as fragments of herself I would now carry to our children. I felt tears prick my eyes. Not just for what she had kept from us, but for what she had entrusted me to do. For the weight of her love threaded through her secrecy. For the responsibility I had to translate that love into understanding for the kids. The city outside continued its indifferent hum, cars moving, pedestrians crossing streets, unaware of the quiet reckoning happening in this small office, high above them. How do I start?" I asked, voice trembling. "Do I tell them the whole truth, or just pieces, mister?" Hale shook his head. "Pieces, and gently. Let them digest, let them process, and always let them know. She loved them more than anything. That will be the anchor." Daniel nodded in agreement. She believed the right words, spoken at the right time, could protect them. She trusted that you could do the same. Okay, I leaned back, closing my eyes for a long moment, imagining their small faces, their steady breathing at night, their trust in me. The thought of disturbing that delicate balance made my chest ache, but I also felt a quiet determination. I would carry her life, her story, her sacrifices into the world of our children, carefully, lovingly. As she had hoped, the room fell into silence again, but it was a softer silence now. The tension remained, but it had shifted, from fear to preparation, from uncertainty to responsibility. I glanced at the binder one last time. Her words, her life, her truth, delicate, fragile, essential, waiting to be shared in pieces with the one she had loved most. And I realized that the truth, no matter how difficult, would not break them, it would shape them slowly, gently. With the care she had always intended, the sun dipped lower, shadows stretching across the floor like long fingers. The city continued on, oblivious. But in this quiet office, high above the streets, I understood for the first time the weight of truth, and the depth of the love it carried. And I took a deep breath, and for the first time I felt ready to carry it home. The hallway was quiet when I stepped out of the office. The soft hum of the air conditioning mixed with the distant echo of heels clicking against polished floors. Sunlight fell unevenly through the tall windows, brushing across the carpet in pale stripes, catching motes of dust that hung like tiny ghosts in the air. I could still feel the weight of the conversation pressing against my chest, heavy, dense, and almost physical. I paused for a moment, hand on the railing, letting the silence wrap around me. My body felt older somehow, older and slower, and yet steadier than it had in days, maybe weeks. The binder lay on the chair behind me, filled with pieces of her life I had never touched, besides pieces of her courage and silence that now demanded I carry them. The city beyond the windows looked different, sharper, louder, more alive. Cars moved with purpose, horns honked, pedestrians shuffled with intent, and I realized I was noticing everything with a clarity I hadn't felt before. The world hadn't stopped for grief. It simply went on, indifferent and vibrant, and I was about to step back into it with a burden I had no choice but to bear. I walked slowly down the hallway, each step deliberate, the carpet soft under my shoes, the walls cool and impassive. Daniel's presence lingered in my mind, as did Mr. Hale's words, quiet, measured, almost pleading. Trust yourself. Protect them. Let them understand when they can. Those words were not a command, not an instruction, but a plea for me to carry forward what she could no longer guide. The elevator doors slid open with a metallic whisper. I stepped inside, pressing the button for the lobby, the soft light reflecting off the steel walls. The silence of the elevator was almost comforting, cocoon-like, though my chest ached with the weight of new responsibility. Every floor ticked past slowly, each chime a reminder of time moving forward. Indifferent to grief, indifferent to loss, indifferent to the life I thought I knew. I gripped the binder in my lap, running my fingers over the textured cover. The notes she had left, the careful records, the hidden accounts of choices made in silence, they were now mine to interpret, mine to carry to our children, mine to shield them with, or to unravel carefully, one truth at a time. I thought of their faces, their small hands reaching for mine, their eyes bright and trusting, their questions so simple yet so piercing. How do you hand a child pieces of a life they never knew existed without shattering the world they believed was safe? How do you allow them to grieve and understand, to mourn and still feel secure? The elevator slowed, and I felt a tightening in my stomach as it approached the lobby. Each floor felt like a descent into reality, the weight of what I now knew pressing more firmly on my shoulders. Grief had changed its shape in the past hours, no longer raw and consuming, but tempered into something heavier, more purposeful. Responsibility, duty, love, the doors opened, spilling bright light into the confined metal space. I stepped out, the hum of the city immediately wrapping around me. Cars passed close, their engines vibrating through the pavement. A street musician's notes drifted through an open window above a cafe, mingling with the chatter of people rushing by. Everything was alive, everything was moving, everything was relentless. I walked toward the revolving doors, each step deliberate. The binder remained clutched in my hands, a talisman, a map, a reminder that the past and the present now collided in a space that demanded careful navigation. The world outside seemed sharper, more precise, as though seeing it through the lens of what I now knew had altered every contour, every shadow, every reflection in the glass buildings. Cat, I remembered Mr. Hale's final words as I pushed the door open. Protect them. Let the truth come in pieces. Trust yourself, and I realized that grief alone would no longer define me. It had shifted, morphed into something that carried weight, purpose, and expectation. I could feel it in my spine, in the set of my shoulders, in the steady rhythm of my heart. I was no longer only a man mourning a wife I had lost. I was a father, a guardian, the keeper of a legacy she had entrusted to me. The streets were busy. People passed without noticing, their lives uninterrupted by the quiet reckoning that filled me from the inside. I paused for a moment, letting the noise of the city wash over me, and realized I was no longer merely reacting to loss. I was preparing for the work ahead, the careful unfolding of truths, the measured guidance of young hearts, the navigation of love, grief, and revelation all at once. A taxi horn blared nearby, startling me slightly, and I let out a small, unsteady laugh. The world went on, indifferent and alive, and I was expected to find a way to exist in it with a new awareness, a new burden, and a new mission. I tucked the binder under my arm, feeling the weight of it press into my side. Each page contained not just secrets, but the blueprint of her bravery, her hidden life, the careful construction of safety she had created for us. I felt both terrified and honored to carry it, to honor it, to translate it for the children who would one day need to know. I glanced back toward the building, its glass reflecting the fading sunlight in shards of orange and pink. The quiet, tall office above the street had changed me. The conversations, the revelations, the trust placed in my hands, they had shifted grief into something I could hold, something I could use to guide, protect, and nurture. As I stepped onto the sidewalk, the city seemed more intense, more vivid. Each sound, each movement, each breath felt amplified. And yet, amidst the chaos, there was a clarity, a sense of purpose I hadn't felt since the day she passed. I walked toward the car, the binder pressed close. Each step was steady now, deliberate. The grief remained, but it was tempered with responsibility. The sorrow had deepened into resolve, a quiet determination to honor her life, her choices, her love. Kent, the traffic lights changed, and I moved with them, carrying both the weight and the promise of what I now knew. And for the first time since her death, I realized that leaving the building would not mean leaving grief behind. I was taking more than sorrow with me. I was carrying a legacy, a responsibility, and a truth that would shape the life of my children in ways I was only beginning to understand. The sun dipped lower, long shadows stretching across the sidewalk. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of it all settle into me like a second skin. And I understood finally that the life ahead would not just be about surviving grief. It would be about navigating it, shaping it, and using it to guide the children who depended on me. I stepped into the car, the binder resting beside me, and let the engine rumble to life. Outside, the city roared. Inside, I carried her silence, her bravery, and her love. And as the streets blurred past the windows, I realized I was leaving with more than grief. I was leaving with the responsibility of everything she had protected, everything she had hidden, and everything she had trusted me to carry forward. And the road stretched ahead. I didn't know what I would do with it all yet, but I would figure it out one careful, deliberate step at a time. And the house smelled of late summer, even though the windows were shut. Dust stirred lightly when I moved past the hall, and the curtains swayed where a soft evening breeze pressed against the glass. Outside, the sky was bruised purple and gray, the last traces of sunlight spilling over the rooftops. Inside, the quiet was so thick it seemed to press against my chest. I sank into the couch, my children beside me, their small bodies warm against mine. Breathing easy and unaware of the storm that had passed and the truths that now waited in shadow. I watched them as dusk filled the rooms, Their hair caught the fading light in faint halos. They laughed softly at some shared thought, their hands brushing over a game board. I could see her in them, the tilt of the head, the way one of them crinkled a nose when concentrating, the shy smile that appeared at the smallest delight. She had been here, she had lived here, she had loved like this. And now she was gone. I wanted to speak, to fill the room with words that might explain everything, but the words would not come. The truths I carried felt too heavy, too fragile, too capable of shattering the delicate world my children still inhabited. I pressed my hands into my lap and watched the patterns of light shift across the carpet. Shadows lengthened, stretching across the floor like slow-moving hands. The binder lay on the coffee table, still unopened for the moment, a silent sentinel of what I now knew. I thought of every conversation with Mr. Hale, every pause, every deliberate choice of words. The secrets, the sacrifices, the life she had hidden to protect them, they waited patiently for the right moment. And I understood finally that patience wasn't just a lesson in waiting, it was a lesson in love. I heard the clock tick in the hall, sharp and rhythmic. Time moved, unrelenting and indifferent, and yet I could feel it bending around us in this quiet house. I shifted slightly, and one of them leaned against me, sighing softly. The small warmth of their body against mine was both comforting and heartbreaking. I wanted to shield them, to carry the weight of all things for them, and yet I knew that someday the truth would need to be carried together. The evening deepened. Outside, the streetlights flickered on one by one, spilling pools of amber across the pavement. The sound of a distant car, tires on wet asphalt, reminded me that the city continued beyond these walls. Moving forward without. Inside, the house held its own pulse, slow and quiet, mirroring the rhythm of my heart. I let my fingers trace the outline of the binder, feeling its weight, imagining the words within as both a map and a mirror. I thought of my wife, of how she had carried all of this alone, shielding us, balancing danger and love in equal measure. She hadn't looked for recognition or praise. She had only wanted safety. For me, for the children, for herself in the quiet moments no one would see. And now her work, her choices, and her courage had fallen to me. And I caught myself glancing at my children again, watching the small details. The way one fiddled with a piece from the game, the other humming softly without knowing it. I could see the fragments of her in them, subtle, tender, impossible to ignore. And yet their world was whole and innocent, still untouched by the weight of what I carried. The truth waited. Patient, insistent, but hidden behind layers of care and timing. I thought about how I would begin to unfold it, piece by piece, in a way that they could bear. The binder would not be opened tonight, nor tomorrow, not yet. There was a rhythm to revealing, a pacing that mattered more than urgency. The house settled with the deepening night. Floorboards creaked faintly, the walls seemed to exhale in their own way. Outside, a dog barked somewhere down the street, a neighbor's window clicked shut. A soft wind rustled the leaves against the siding. I felt small, contained, aware of how much space this house had held for a life we had lost and a life we still had to protect. I thought about Mr. Hale's words again, the gravity of his voice, the gentleness behind it. Trust yourself. Protect them. Let the truth come in pieces. It wasn't a command. It wasn't a responsibility to bear lightly. It was a trust, a plea, and a warning. The mantle of it pressed down, and yet there was a strange comfort in knowing I had been chosen to hold it. The room darkened further, shadows merging into each other. The children's small movements slowed, their eyes drooping, their breathing softening as sleep approached. I stayed awake a while longer, letting the quiet stretch around me. I imagined the words I would eventually speak, the questions I would need to answer, the care I would need to take. Each decision would carry weight. Each truth revealed would ripple through their lives in ways I could only begin to imagine. And yet, in the stillness, I also felt a strange peace. The grief, while still present, was no longer raw. It had transformed into something steadier, tempered by purpose. Love, I realized, sometimes meant holding everything alone, at least for a while. And sometimes it meant waiting, watching, learning the perfect moment to release what must be known. I finally set the binder aside, letting it rest unopened, its contents safe for the time being. I drew a slow breath, feeling the tension leave my shoulders, replaced by a quiet resolve. The night outside deepened, calm and patient. A single street lamp flickered, casting long shadows across the sidewalk, and I felt the same steady pulse within me that matched the rhythm of the house, the children, and the life that still needed careful tending.